Hi, everybody. Hope you are well. And it's an absolute pleasure for the Roots and Roots Adda archive to have Professor Jeffrey Wilson with us. And currently, Jeff is directing the Harvard Law Writing Center at the Harvard University. He's also the co-founder and the co-chief editor of the very path-breaking journal, I would say, the Public Humanities. And I say path-breaking because it has been doing and it intends to build up an extremely de-hierarchical, a very horizontal form of scholarship, a very distributive form of scholarship, which many journals, or rather, I would say in some cases, especially when it comes to inviting teenagers to write for academic journals, thought pieces, have hardly been done by any journal in the previous times, at least not in my knowledge. And I think it's important to mention this to flag off our conversation because today we are going to specifically have a conversation on the question of the humanities and the public. And this is one of the many aspects that public humanities rather than just simply claiming on paper that we are a public humanities journal and we intend to do public humanities. So through their examples and instances, they try to do. So thank you once again, Jeff, for being here, for your time, and for all the wonderful work that you are doing.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation. But of course, we have to start out with congratulations on your co-authored article from this morning, from the Indian knowledge system to the plural knowledge systems of India. That was amazing to see that published this morning, and what a thrill to work on that with you, as well as your earlier article, the saffronization of public knowledge in India. So a two-time public humanities author, and it's really nice to just now be able to kind of chat with you informally.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. And I must acknowledge, thanks for your very kind words, but at the same time, I must also very strongly publicly acknowledge the strong mentorship that I have received. And in this case, me and my co-authors received throughout the process of development, and which is, I think, another beautiful characteristic feature of public humanities rather than just stalling ideas and perspectives as being problematic or controversial or maybe complex, but trying to like consistently revisit them, rebuild them, and trying to refine them as much as possible. And just because we have started off our conversation on this note, I would like to, I'd like to sort of begin the whole conversational process with this a very basic question. Humanities, the whole idea of humanities before it even became an specific academic discipline, the whole idea of humanities was supposed to speak about the humans, speak to the humans, talk about humanity, talk about humanness, talk about values of caring and sharing, and all of these elements by default has to do with the engagement with the public. What really went wrong? I mean, I know it's quite an expansive question, but if you can briefly respond, what really went wrong according to you, someone who has been in this field of public humanities for such a long period of time and now indulging so actively with the journal? What do you think what went wrong that we have to separately initiate a space, an idea, a philosophy of public humanities?
Yeah, I love this question. So, sometimes we overthink the humanities, but I think we have a real simple definition of it, which is that the humanities study the things that humans make, and that means our art, our paintings, our literature, but also our religions and our societies and our histories. All of these are things that the humans make, and all the humanities are is people who are interested in analyzing and talking about and debating, the meanings of those things. Um, so that's an extremely organically public endeavor. That's, we do that all of the time in our lives. At the dinner table, we do it in conversations with friends on the internet, out at the pub and houses of worship. We're constantly interpreting the things that humans make. And because it's so exciting and lots of people want to do it, suddenly it gains energy, and that energy and that interest sort of needs to be organized in some way. And so this is where kind of the institutionalized version of the humanities comes from, where we have now disciplines for literary studies and religious studies and philosophy and visual arts, which helps to organize all of these thoughts and conversations, but then also are administered by institutions, which inherently brings with it the problems of institutions. And this is where you get the humanities from shifting from this organically public endeavor to the institutionalized form of the academic humanities. And so the academic humanities are fantastic for doing that organization. It allows us to coordinate our understanding of the world and so forth. But the public humanities is only really needed because the academic humanities exist. And somewhere along the way, folks who are working in the academic humanities and operating in that space kind of got so professionalized into thinking only through the academic angle and have I think lost touch a little bit with the original organically public aspect of the humanities, that it became such a professionalized endeavor that a lot of the hyper specialized academic, extremely sophisticated, but also very difficult to understand if you don't hold a PhD in the field in which someone is working. Uh, so public humanities comes along and tries to reconnect us to that original sort of form of the humanities that was out there and conversational and not institutionalized. Um, and so that's why sort of like the humanities should just be the public humanities, but because of the academic humanities, we need to sort of create this branded offshoot that helps to organize folks who are interested in this sort of work.
Awesome. That's a very brilliant way to start off, Jeff. Especially, the way you distinguish between the humanities and how it has been professionalized, how it is very anthropocentric in nature and not taking into account other forms of the humanities or the vastly the idea of humanity. That also connects to various other living forms, more than human living forms as well. And at the same time, how also importantly, you have talked about the whole question of uh, that why we separately require public humanities is to engage with along the public the ideas and the perspectives rather than just restricting ourselves within the very fortified spaces of the academia and the certificates and the degrees and all of these aspects. And while I was listening to you, one aspect that was coming in my mind, and again, and this time I would like to sort of, direct the conversation towards very specifically with the journal Public Humanities. And I mean, since day one, since day one, I have come across the journal, and of course, it has been, a couple of years now, and it's doing fascinating work in multiple directions. One thing that I've always, struck across my mind is. Um, didn't you face, questions from your colleagues or maybe from any other part of the core academic space where people questioned you about the novelty of what the public humanities is trying to do? And I use the word novelty in a critical sense, in the sense that it is solely problematically restricted within these very structured academic spaces that, oh, I mean, how can you open up a call for papers of strictly for 14 to 18 years old? I mean, what you have to do with the aspect of songs and lyrics in the academia? No one did ever question you about the novelty of all of these perspectives.
Um, well, on specifically the for students issue, I'm someone who believes that we need to get the reins of power into the hands of our students as quickly as possible. I think that is the right way to go about things, to see the knowledge that they're creating and help them understand how it is that knowledge production works, so that they can be the ones who are creating the content that we're all using to help us understand and live our lives. I will say skepticism about the very idea of a crossover academic journal that is in conversation with public audiences and has non-academic authors um, is, I would say, criticism of that has been a minor note. There's maybe a couple strains of folks who are skeptical of the idea, but for the most part, there's been enthusiasm. Uh, But the tricky thing has been it's just been a practical problem. It's just been okay, we like the idea for the journal, but it seems very difficult to pull off. And the reason it's difficult to pull off is because we're trying to do multiple things at once. We're trying to, one, be peer reviewed so that there's quality control over the knowledge that is coming out of the journal. Um, but two, we're trying to be speedy in delivery to readers so that we can speak to of the moment things that are happening. And that's in sharp tension with peer review, which takes time to assess knowledge, to do comments, feedback for authors, improve the quality of papers, and do revisions. Uh, Three, we're open access. And that is in sharp contrast to most academic journals that exist behind a paywall, where the sort of the reigning model of academic journals is a journal charges a university an exorbitant cost to buy access to that journal for the constituents at that university, students, faculty, etc. Whereas all of our articles are free for everyone who wants them to read. And so we had to figure out a financial model to be able to do that. And Cambridge University Press was the one who sort of met us halfway where we had the idea. And being open access was a sticking point for us. We said, it's public humanities. It has to be open access. You can't have public humanities behind a paywall. And they figured out a financial model that would work. That also means, in contrast to a different publishing model, where authors have to pay these exorbitant article processing charges. Sometimes authors will have to pay $3,000 to publish their work, and it's just not realistic that folks can do that. So we figured out a way to avoid both of those models. And then finally, the journal also is just, encouraging diverse voices, is open to articles from folks who are different from the standard academic PhD holding audience that usually writes for academic journals. So we know that means we're going to have to provide additional support and coaching for folks to help them learn how to write in these ways. And so we take a much more, I would call it, supportive approach to the peer review process at public humanities than what you often get at academic journals. I myself have received, some peer review reports that are just absolutely brutal, and there's sort of the veil of anonymity that happens there, where an academic is anonymously reviewing an article and can just be as cruel as they want to. So we try to tell our reviewers, we want to figure out where the good ideas are and help develop those ideas, as opposed to just rendering judgment, this is good or this is bad.
Awesome. And also when you were talking about the model in terms of the publication, and of course you were talking about the logistical challenges, which are very right. Along with that, I wanted to add one more challenge, a challenge that, of course, I have encountered as an author. And I would say, of course, it's a positive challenge, just to flag off. Uh, because someone like me who is bred, if I use the word bred, within the very academic space of writing, someone who does mostly academic writing, of course, a bit of OPET writing here and there, has always faced this challenge in terms of the language, right? How to
Mhm.
transition a language that speaks to the vision of public humanities. I mean, not just the journal, but the whole philosophy as well. And this has been one of the amazing learning experience with your mentorship, I would say, especially the way you always, sort of mentor in terms of how to do the language part, how to make the sentences approachable. Most importantly, how to keep in mind a non-specialized audience while we are writing, because that is a central idea of public humanities. But you are also someone who has, on the one side, written enormously within very so-called traditional academic spaces with traditional publishing houses. On the other side, you have also written enormously in OPED formats. You are sitting as the director of the Harvard Law Writing Center, and with a very, very basic idea of law writing, which is again very different. It's a very different process, right? My question is, how on your side, like when you were building yourself as a public humanities scholar in terms of writing in different forms and formats, how did you juggle through these spaces? Because I believe, at least from my perspective, it initially would have been quite challenging, right?
Yeah, with public humanities, I'll say the biggest surprise in the journal thus far, we're only 2 years old, has been we really thought it would be a if you build it, they will come type situation, which is to say that if you create this space in which academics can write for public audiences in non-specialized ways that are accessible, that's kind of a crossover between the op-ed writing and the academic, peer-reviewed writing that folks will flock to this and will love that the space exists. And that has been the case. A lot of people are interested in writing for the journal, but it's also been the case that we've been surprised often by sort of the coaching that folks need to be able to do this sort of shift in registers from academic writing into more public facing for non-specialist writing. I mean, it's like we don't need to romanticize academic writing, right? It's just a question of specialization. So my father-in-law is a firefighter, and when he speaks with other firefighters, they use a technical vocabulary that is completely doesn't make sense to me. But then when my father-in-law talks to me and talks about how they run their operations there, he has to adjust the way that he speaks so that I can understand it. And that's all that we're doing with public humanities is the belief that we want to be just as substantively rigorous as we always are with academic writing, that the knowledge is quality controlled, but that there needs to be a shift in the way that we speak in order to address a different audience and speak to non-specialists and with non-specialists. So that's been probably the single biggest just kind of fascinating thing that we've encountered so far with public humanities. For my own part in this experience, absolutely no one ever teaches you how to do this, and there's no class in grad school that teaches this, and you sort of do get professionalized into ways of writing that you're just like, well, I assume that's the way that we do it because that's what I see everyone else doing even though I don't think that that's the right way to go about things, that seems to be what you have to do in order to publish in this journal. Um, and so it's really been kind of trial and error is how you learn to do this kind of writing. I think a lot of individualized attention, getting notes back from editors, but I think what has to be there, at least what was I should say, what was there for me was just a deep desire to connect with audiences beyond my professional field. And I always think of I wanted to do scholarship for the people that I grew up with, which is like off of the sort of standard in the United States pathway to academic higher education. Um, but like some of the smartest, most fascinating, most intelligent, fun people that I know, my friends that I went to grade school and high school with, but if they pick up an academic journal that they can't make heads or tails of it. They just don't understand what's going on because it's not written with them in mind. So I wanted to make knowledge accessible to them, sort of based in a belief that um, knowledge should be freely available, both financially, but also in terms of accessible intellectually for, as many people as possible. And that's just like a basic ideological belief that I don't think is very controversial, but that for most, or I should say for a lot of academics, that gets sort of lost in the professionalization process. And so public humanities is sort of just like giving permission to go back to the reason that we got into this stuff in the first place, which I think has connected with a lot of authors and readers.
And you're so much right. Like, I mean, this is also something that have always struck me. I mean, of course, we can let people know what could be a possible way of doing public humanities or writing for the public humanities, but it is never teachable per se. Like, we really cannot be so grammatical about teaching public humanities. In fact, I mean, the whole purpose of public humanities is not to be so grammatical in that sense, right? It's rather being trying to break a lot of those conventionalities of writing and then trying to think and write beyond that. And in this circumstance, and I know that I mean, we are closing and inching close towards the time, but I would also like to know. I mean, especially I have always felt like since I again came across the whole idea of public humanities, it is so much essential in a time when we are consistently speaking through the praxis. I mean, we have somewhere somewhat reached that point where, of course, we are not dismissing or banishing theories, but what we are also trying to tell is, I mean, we just cannot sit and munch around fancy theoretical ideologies. We have to consistently think in translating it into praxis. Otherwise, we really don't understand the value of those theories. So in that circumstance, again, public humanities is a very essential component of practice in our daily life. So in that way, what I see as an individual is that public humanities is not just an entity. It's not just about a journal, but also it's a philosophy of life, of our everyday circumstances, of our everyday conversations. Now, in that perspective, if I can ask you, and again, because I'm sure you also have your own future visions, not just about the journal, but the whole philosophy of public humanities as well. I mean, in today's, circumstances, whether we are talking about socio-political crisis, environmental crisis, and various other forms of crisis that the world is currently encountering, how does the public humanities as a tool of resistance and resilience can speak to these crises and bring the public together?
Yeah, I think the thing I would say here is that to me, public humanities feels, and it's sort of is designed to be a little bit more like a classroom than a journal. And by that I mean, if you think about the way that a classroom works, the way it often works is you have a teacher who has deep subject matter expertise that is coming into a classroom with students who are eager to learn but don't share that subject matter expertise. And what often happens just sort of naturally in a classroom is that in communicating this deep subject matter expertise, you make connections and you make analogies to things that are happening in the world. So it might be a news story or it might be an example that's come up. That type of thing is very natural in a classroom setting, and there's a conversational kind of back and forth about it. But that sort of approach to knowledge kind of gets filtered away when we do the academic journal writing, and it needs to be buttoned up, and you don't have time for those sort of the moment connections and those sorts of things. And so the public humanities really just sort of emphasizes like those are the sorts of things that we're looking to make connections with. And I think, like academics have always been human beings and we always live our lives and we always, make connections between the ideas that I'm thinking long and hard about that I've spent 3 weeks studying. And, when I have to go drop my kids off for soccer practice, you sort of see those connections out in the world. And so public humanities is really just sort of a place in which to do that. And I think it's just it's been energizing to see how many different connections there are that folks are able to make kind of in the world, and I've learned so much in the process myself.
Right. And in this regard, we just have one question in the chat box, Jeff, in case if you'd like to answer, and I'll be happy to read it out for you. So Tanya asked that, and also I think it very much connects to the question aspects of jargon and the technicalities of writing in terms of accessibility. So Tanya asked that, especially in a time when we are all living in a like a kind of a matrix rat race, right? Like we have to have this number of publications, these number of citations. In these circumstances, how do you envision public humanities can also speak to these challenges and restructure the system?
Yeah, I should say here, like the academic writing in which there's 275 footnotes. Like I love that. Like I revel in that stuff. I could read that sort of thing all day long. Um, but that doesn't mean there's not room for something else, right? And so academic jargon, like I will eat up an article with tons of jargon in it. I love it. But I go back to the classroom example, and I think any teachers on the call will know it's so much more difficult to teach an introductory course than it is to teach an advanced course, a high level course to people who already have experience in a field. Because when you teach the introductory course, and this is sort of the thrust of the question, you have to figure out the right terminology. How can I introduce these extremely complex but extremely important ideas to people who don't already know them, who don't already have a foundation for understanding these things? And that requires a radical shift in the way that you speak. And it goes to the point of simplification. So when you think about expertise, there's lots of ways, but there's sort of two ways that expertise can be communicated and conveyed. It can be the 250 footnoted article that goes into such granular detail that we get so nuanced with our understanding, and that plays well with other folks who are interested in that level of granular detail. But expertise can also be communicated in a very different way, where you have the judgment to be able to say what is most important with this idea. What are the three things that you need to know about this particular idea in contrast to the 250 things that you need to know about this idea? And so exercising expertise in that different way, where it's more sort of you're restricting what you say and you're exercising judgment about what's most important to say, is one way that I think the terminology becomes especially important. Of real expertise comes in being able to explain complex things clearly to people who don't already know them, and that's sort of the challenge with public humanities.
Right, and also in addition to that, I mean, I would also like to flag off another very essential thing that I feel is important for public humanities is often in our daily lives when we read an idea in general, when we read a theory, we read a philosophy, we often come across this question within ourselves where we see, okay, where to start from? How do I start? How do I start learning about the basics of this particular area? And I think public humanities, in a lot of ways, also answers this question. I mean, the public humanities journal, the way, especially the of the moment that you also mentioned at the somewhere at the beginning of the conversation, very much addresses this perspective. I mean, of course, we will have endless number of questions and reflections, Jeff, for you because it's such a fascinating conversation. But I know that you are in a rush, so I will not hold you back longer. And I also express my hearty gratitude to all of us here who have joined the conversation. But I'm very much hopeful that in the future we will have you once again for a more longer conversation to have more perspectives and ideas about public humanities. So thank you, Jeff, once again for your time and for such thoughtful reflections.
And yeah, I just want to say again, sort of the process of working with you on these two articles that you've done for public humanities has been sort of the embodiment of everything that we're talking about today, which is to say that, I'm by training a Shakespeare scholar, and so I don't have a ton of context about the saffronization of public knowledge in India. And so the challenge for you was figuring out how do I frame this really important idea in a way that an American who is a Shakespeare scholar by training but is interested in learning about it is going to have access and be able to work with these ideas. And so then with the article that was released today, which I again encourage everyone to go read, the From Indian Knowledge System to the Plural Knowledge Systems of India, I think that one was especially fascinating to read, learn about. It's a radical argument. I hope folks will give it a look and engage with some conversation with Sion about it. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks a lot, Jeff, and it means a lot for us as well, and personally for me to being mentored consistently to build the article to the public and for the sake of public humanities.